Hey auntie, a baby's coming. Huh? Next year, there'll be a baby here. A baby? Whose kid? It's your baby, auntie. I heard someone found a mom for it. After 3 years of marriage, having a child was something we longed for, but it just wasn't happening. When my nephew told me this, there wasn't even a sign of pregnancy yet. My name is Kelly Manson, I'm 32 years old. My husband, a colleague and senior at work, transferred to my department in my 3rd year at the company. We shared similar interests and got along strangely well, starting to date almost immediately and marrying 2 years later. I've continued to work even after getting married. Our relationship feels more like an extension of our friendship than a traditional marriage, making every day incredibly enjoyable. Since our company isn't very large, commuting together often results in playful teasing about our couple's commute, which is fun in its own right. My husband is always smiling, and just being near him warms my heart. Even though life is enjoyable with just the two of us, I often wonder what it would be like to have a child. My husband loves children, and when he sees couples with children in the park, he looks at them with very kind eyes. He's never outright said he wants kids. Probably to avoid putting pressure on me. My husband has a divorced brother who currently lives with my mother-in-law at their home. My father-in-law passed away due to illness when my husband was in 2nd grade. However, my father-in-law's family was quite well off and provided a lot of support, so my mother-in-law didn't have to work to make ends meet. The first time I met my mother-in-law, she seemed calm and collected, but speaking with her revealed a different image. I also felt a distinct difference in how she treated my brother-in-law and my husband. Kelly, I hear you work at the same company as Sean. Yes. Is that really okay? What do you mean? Well, it's just that, a man working at such a small-time company. I mean, women usually quit after getting married anyway, so it doesn't really matter where they work, but don't you think the man you marry should at least be? What does she mean by that? I wondered if she was disparaging my husband, but since she looked genuinely concerned, I was at a loss for words. Looking over at my husband, he seemed a bit awkward and gave a wry smile. I'm planning to keep working even after I get married. Oh, is that so? It must be tough if your husband doesn't work at a top-tier company, forcing the wife to work too. It's not like that. Oh, it's fine, really. You're gonna be Sean's wife, after all. Can't help it. Though I'd have second thoughts if it were John's wife, my mother-in-law said with a grin. I felt somewhat uncomfortable with her words. Her comments were sprinkled with praises for my brother-in-law. According to my husband, it's always been like this. Since childhood, John, who did well in school, passed the top-tier university on his first try and landed a job at a renowned company, has been the apple of my mother-in-law's eye. In contrast, she seemed uninterested in my husband, who didn't shine as brightly academically, attended a local college instead of a top-tier one, and worked at a lesser-known small company. It wasn't that she demeaned my husband, but praise was always reserved for John, my husband once said with a hint of sadness. No matter how I looked at it, my mother-in-law's words sounded like she was belittling my husband, but I decided it wasn't worth mentioning. He probably understands this better than anyone. John was absent due to work both times we visited to greet them and during the meeting before we got married. John has a major role at a big corporation, so he can't just take time off easily, she boasted then too. Thus, the wedding day was the first time I met my brother-in-law. He was polite and proper, yet there was a coldness about him. My husband said he wasn't always like this. According to him, John changed after his divorce. It was caused by his ex-wife's miscarriage. They had been undergoing fertility treatments for over 5 years without success, and when they finally conceived, the miscarriage deeply affected my sister-in-law, who then returned to her parents' home. Since my husband had been living alone since graduating college, he wasn't in regular contact with them. However, he helped move his sister-in-law back home. Noting her devastated mental state at the time. Seeing her like that, he probably doesn't want to pressure me about wanting kids. I have an older sister, 5 years my senior, who's a high-flying career woman with a child. She works at a fashion magazine company and has risen to the rank of editor-in-chief, but she's also divorced. The cause was her ex-husband's neglect of the family. Despite both of them working, he was completely uncooperative with housework and childcare, never bothering to pick up their child or care when they cried. Yet, he did nothing but complain daily about the undone chores, leading my sister to reach her breaking point and return to our parents' home with her child. My former brother-in-law didn't even fight for custody and left the child with my sister. He seemed kind when they got married, but turned out to be just a lazy guy who was nice. My sister said she felt refreshed after the divorce, laughing it off. Her son, my nephew, turned 10 this year. He's been a peculiar kid ever since he was young. Since my sister divorced when her son was 3, they lived with our parents for 2 years until I got married. Despite her irregular work hours and unpredictable return times, he would always be sitting at the entrance, waiting for her about 5 minutes before she arrived, saying, "Mom's gonna be home soon." At first, we thought it was a coincidence, but since it happened every day, my parents also wondered how he knew. There was also a night he started fussing about a kitty. We had no clue what he was talking about until we followed him outside and found a kitten trembling in a ditch. It was so exhausted it wasn't even crying anymore, leaving us all wondering how he knew. That cat is still living at my parents' house and has become great buddies with my nephew. If I started listing all the peculiar things about my nephew's actions, there'd be no end. So, by the time he started elementary school, everyone was more inclined to believe his unusual claims than to dismiss them as silly. When he said a baby was coming, I felt more inclined to believe it might be true. However, not wanting to jump to conclusions or get my husband's hopes up without reason, I didn't tell him immediately. I've talked to my husband about my nephew's mysterious abilities before, and although he believed them, he didn't want to get overly excited just in case. And then, 3 months later, I indeed found out I was pregnant. When I told my husband about what my nephew had said, he was impressed. "Wow, he really is a mysterious kid, huh? Right? He can even communicate with animals. Not just our cat, but with other dogs and cats as well." He once said a dog we passed on a walk was saying it had a stomach ache. Later, we met its owner, who was amazed because the dog had swallowed something strange. "It feels like he'd know if we did anything wrong." Huh? You got something to hide? That's funny. But yeah, I guess I'm gonna be a dad. What about you, Kelly? What are you gonna do about work? I'm thinking of continuing as long as it's manageable. Got it. But really, don't overdo it. Yeah. My husband told his mom about the pregnancy, but he said her reaction was hard to read, like she wasn't sure whether to be happy or not. He mentioned it might be complicated for her to simply be happy because of his older brother's ex-wife situation, but I couldn't help but wonder if she just wasn't interested in our child. After all, she always talks about nothing but my brother-in-law. Despite that, the pregnancy has been going smoothly, and I was able to take maternity leave 6 weeks before the due date. That day, my sister said she would buy clothes for the baby, so my nephew came shopping with us. However, as noon approached, my sister got called into work and had to go in. Sorry. There's something only I can take care of. It's okay, go ahead. I'll have lunch with Tom and head back. Are you sure? Totally fine. Right, Tom, let's have lunch together. Yeah. I want a hamburger. Okay, then. Maybe I'll have a hamburger too. Then, I'm sorry to ask, but please take care of him. Call me if anything happens. With that, my sister headed to work with an apologetic look. Watching her, I couldn't help but think she's still so cool. My sister, capable and action-oriented, has always been someone I admired. She says she's done with marriage, but I hope she finds someone great who can make her and my nephew happy again. After window shopping for a while with my nephew, we looked for a place to eat lunch and he picked out a restaurant. It looked a bit fancy and I hesitated at first, but then I thought, why not treat ourselves once in a while? Plus, it's been a long time since I had lunch with my nephew, so I decided to splurge a bit as his aunt. But I was surprised when we entered. There was my mother-in-law. Mother? Oh, Kelly. Are you here alone? I'm waiting for John. Despite having the day off, he went to work. But he said he'd be back around lunch, so we thought we'd have lunch together. And I've wanted to try this place for a while. I see. And who is this? Oh, this is my nephew, Tom. My sister's son. Oh, that's right, he was at the wedding. She glanced at my nephew. Normally, my nephew greets people clearly, but for some reason, he didn't say anything to my mother-in-law this time. We were then led to a table right next to where my mother-in-law was seated. I couldn't help but think we could have been seated a bit further away. And even though we ordered the hamburger my nephew wanted, he barely touched his food and kept glancing over at my mother-in-law. Is something wrong? Do you remember your grandmother? To my question, my nephew shook his head but looked like he wanted to say something, then stared intently at my belly. I was incredibly curious. Because when my nephew acts like this, he's definitely sensing something. Then, slowly, my nephew began to speak. Auntie. Yes? What's up? Then he pointed at my belly and said, the baby wants to say something. What? To be careful around that lady, he said, pointing his finger towards my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law, feeling his gaze, looked our way. Then she frowned deeply when she saw him pointing at her. Hey, what's this? Haven't you learned it's rude to point at people? I'm sorry, just a moment, Tom. But the baby said, last time we couldn't be born because of that lady. What? What are you talking about? Even if you're a kid, that's rude, my mother-in-law exclaimed, though she seemed a bit panicked. I couldn't understand why my nephew would say something like this, but there must be a reason. What does he mean we couldn't be born? Who's he talking about? That lady spilled oil in the hallway, and Mom fell. That's why we couldn't be born. What? What do you mean by that? Suddenly, a voice came from behind, and turning around, there stood my brother-in-law. John. Oil? Are you saying Tabitha fell in the hallway because of that? My brother-in-law said, turning my mother-in-law pale. Tabitha is presumably the name of my brother-in-law's ex-wife. What are you talking about? How can you take a child's word for it? What's with this kid? Creepy child, my mother-in-law raised her voice. Sean told me about Tom's unique stories. Tom, can you really talk with the baby in the belly? When my brother-in-law asked, my nephew nodded firmly. Right now, I still remember things from before. I was supposed to be born as your child before. I'll forget once I'm born, but I remember Mom stroking her belly every day and the song Dad used to sing. Song? Yeah, like this song. And my nephew hummed a melody I'd never heard before. At that moment, tears spilled from my brother-in-law's eyes. Oh. Stop it, what are you doing? I feel sick, I'm leaving. There's no mistake, what this kid is saying is true. The melody he just hummed is an original I made. Only Tabitha and the child she was carrying at that time knew it. What nonsense are you talking about? That's creepy. But everything this kid just said is true. If so, the story about the oil earlier. I don't know anything about it. What foolish thing are you saying? There's no way this kid could know about it if he wasn't even there. I cleaned up the oil spill perfectly, so no one should know, my mother-in-law blurted out in the heat of the moment. Then realizing what she said, she covered her mouth with both hands in panic. Mom, what have you done? Because of you, Tabitha. It couldn't be helped. A high school graduate, low education level, and her father was just a mechanic. Not suitable for John at all. I couldn't stand the thought of that woman bearing your child. My brother-in-law's shoulders shook with anger at my mother-in-law's words. Tabitha was trying to please you, enduring whatever you said. You saw with your own eyes how much she struggled, how happy she was to finally conceive after the tough infertility treatment. It's your fault for bringing home the child of a poor woman. I told you I would find you a suitable wife, not for you to waste your money on such a woman and her child. Hearing my mother-in-law's words, my brother-in-law let out a sigh as if to calm his anger and then quietly said to her, Disappear from my sight right now. I don't want to see your face anymore. I won't return home. I will never forgive what you've done. What? You're leaving me? But I'm your mother. It's over, I'll be the one to leave. At his words, my mother-in-law grabbed my brother-in-law's arm desperately. He tried to shake her off, but she clung to him, not letting go. The staff and other customers looked on, wondering what was happening, but my mother-in-law didn't seem to care. However, my brother-in-law forcefully freed himself from her grip and quickly left. Left behind, my mother-in-law began to cry unabashedly in front of everyone. I never expected things to turn out like this. Perhaps my nephew knew my mother-in-law would be here and chose this restaurant for a reason. When I asked him, he said the baby in my belly told him there was someone here he needed to talk to, so we came in. Thanks to that, we ended up in a huge mess. But the idea that my mother-in-law could do such a thing is just too awful. When she broke down crying in the restaurant, the staff asked her to leave because she was disturbing other customers, but she just sat there and wouldn't budge. When the staff looked at us and asked if we knew her, my nephew replied, "She's a complete stranger to us." I almost blurted out "nice" in response. Eventually, the staff had to carry my mother-in-law out of the restaurant. After that, we enjoyed our hamburgers and went home. When I told my husband about it later, he said he'd already heard from his brother. My brother-in-law said he was cutting ties with my mother-in-law. Well, that seems only natural. Then my husband said, "I think I'll do the same." After being disowned by her son, my mother-in-law might try to cozy up to us next. My husband doesn't want someone capable of doing such things to a pregnant woman in his family. The thought that I could be the next victim is frightening. I completely agree. When my brother-in-law was married, it seems my mother-in-law was constantly harassing his wife. Later, when my brother-in-law visited his ex-wife's parents, they said she had been living in fear of my mother-in-law, saying she was scared every day, unable to eat, and had been hospitalized for nearly 2 years because of her weakened state. She's just starting to recover, so they asked him not to see their daughter. My brother-in-law apologized profusely and left. Deep down, he suspected my mother-in-law might have done something, but was afraid to confirm the truth. He didn't want to believe his own mother could do such a thing, so he never verified it. I couldn't protect Tabitha. I've been blaming myself for that. And before I knew it, I had forgotten how to laugh," he said, tears streaming down his face. When I told him to find happiness too, he said his happiness would come after seeing his ex-wife happy again. But he looked relieved, as if a weight had been lifted off him, saying he won't turn a blind eye to reality anymore. The following month, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Then, after a while, my mother-in-law reached out to us. "Hey, isn't it about time the baby was born?" Yes. "Well, congratulations." "So, I've been thinking." "What's that?" "How about we live together in this house from now on?" So it's come to this, just like my husband said. Probably, she's lost contact with her other son by now. I heard from my brother-in-law that my mother-in-law was quite a spender, using her pension entirely for her own leisure. When she ran out of money, she would ask my brother-in-law for more. She didn't want to spend the money my brother-in-law earned on anyone else. Maybe that's why she wanted his wife out. My brother-in-law said it probably would have ended the same way with any wife. John really left, you know? He won't answer my calls, and when I went to his company, I was kicked out by security. Terrible, right? Well. So, I thought, why not get along with you guys from now on? That's not possible. What? Because Sean doesn't like it. He said he doesn't want anything to do with you because you only think about yourself, just like what my brother-in-law said. You mean, my own child would abandon me? Well, Sean said you looked down on him, right? Isn't this what you deserve? So, Sean's phone being disconnected is because I forgot to block your number by accident. My apologies, and with that, I hung up and immediately blocked her. We haven't been in contact with my mother-in-law since. But a few months later, I saw her working part-time at a supermarket. She looked much thinner and worn out. And since she hadn't worked much before, she was slow and getting scolded by customers, apologizing profusely. Now, she's living modestly in a house where no one visits. I happened to pass by her house and saw a broken window covered with cardboard. I wondered if she couldn't afford to fix it, but considering what she did, it seemed like an inevitable end. It's been 3 years since then. My nephew is in middle school, and my son has turned 3. Whether my son is the reincarnation of my brother-in-law's child, I can't say. But that doesn't matter. What's certain is he's our child. My nephew adores him like a younger brother. When they're together, they look just like siblings with a bit of an age gap. My nephew doesn't talk about mysterious things as much as before. But I feel like he's just chosen not to say them. Maybe he's grown up. Recently, my brother-in-law came to visit. Sometimes he looks at my son and seems about to cry. Then he told us his ex-wife has recovered, remarried, and seemed genuinely happy. She had contacted him to meet. I'm getting remarried too. My future mother-in-law is kind and takes good care of me. Please don't worry about me anymore. I will be happy, she said with a truly happy smile. My brother-in-law was smiling genuinely when he told us this story, and both my husband and I were truly happy for him. Right then, my sister and nephew were also visiting, so we all had dinner together at our house. On the way home, my nephew said something that's been on my mind. I've been thinking, for the past 3 years. Thinking what? That he might become my dad. What? Before I could ask more, my nephew just smiled and went on his way. Could he possibly mean my brother-in-law? That's what I'm wondering. I'm feeling a bit thrilled about it. In our home, everything is peaceful, with my husband playing horse with the kids. Being in this scene makes me feel incredibly happy. I deeply cherish this happiness and am determined to protect it.